Hey guys, tonight we're setting the history books aside and stepping into something much older, a world with no maps, only trees, mud, and quiet hope. We're returning to the earliest days of colonial America, not revolution, not war, but something more fragile and far more uncertain. The story of those who came first, who stepped off wooden ships into wilderness, who built homes out of fear, faith, and frost. If you enjoy quiet stories like this, take a second to like the video. And if you're listening from somewhere peaceful, a cabin in Vermont, a quiet room in Toronto, or the back of a truck in Oregon, leave a comment. I'd love to know where you are and what time it is. Now is the time to turn down the lights. Let the noise of your day fade and drift into stillness, because tonight we quietly step back in time. Not to fight, not to conquer, but simply to live. Let's begin. Jamestown, Virginia. Early spring, 1610. They woke before the sky even thought of changing color. No rooster crowed. No church bells rang. Just the sound of wind moving through thin wooden walls and the breath of someone else sleeping nearby. The fort was quiet. A stillness that could only come after a hard winter. One that had taken many and spared few. Even the rats, it seemed, had grown cautious. The man sat up slowly, rubbing a hand across his face. His blanket was damp, not from rain but from the sweat of long nights and the breath of too many people sleeping in one room. They were packed in like cargo, because at one point they had been. His fingers ached, his back ached, and not just from the wooden floor beneath him, but from weeks of labor, illness, hunger. Time here did not pass in hours or days. It passed in coughs, in lost names, in the sound of a shovel striking cold earth outside. He stood, careful not to wake the others. There were only 5 left in this room. There had once been 11. A narrow window let in no light, but the cracks in the wood told him morning was close. He pulled on his coat, stiff, patched, smelling of smoke. A musket leaned against the wall, wrapped in cloth to keep out the wet. Not that he expected to need it today, but they had learned not to take chances. A kettle of water had frozen during the night. He cracked the ice with a spoon, shaved off a few curls, set the metal over the fire pit, and hoped there'd be enough heat left in the embers to melt it. There was no bread. There hadn't been for days, but he found a strip of dried fish, tough, bitter, and older than any of them cared to guess. It would have to do. Outside, the wooden palisades stood like crooked teeth. A few men were already at the gate, repairing the hinges with rough iron. Another was sharpening an axe, not for war, but for trees. Wood was life now. As the sun finally reached the river, a few more faces emerged. Some wore hats, some didn't. One man limped from a wound that had gone sour last winter. A woman, one of the only still alive in the fort, carried a bucket, careful not to spill. No one spoke unless they had to. Voices felt heavier now, as if too many had been buried with the dead. But life still clung to the edges. A boy, barely 10, poked at the dirt with a stick, drawing what looked like a map. Of home, maybe. Or of the future. The man from earlier walked past him and nodded. The boy nodded back. No smile. But not fear either. That was something. The morning's task was to dig out a new drainage trench behind the storage hut. The old one had collapsed in the last rain. Mud soaked their shoes, blisters reopened, hands that once held quills and candles now clutched shovels and rope. He worked beside a man named Robert, thin, pale, missing a front tooth. They didn't talk much, but when they did, it was in whispers. They talked about home, not about England exactly, but about warm bread, chickens, a room with a roof that didn't leak. Simple things. By the time the sun hung directly overhead, a pale, weak thing behind a curtain of gray, the labor had worn deep into their bodies. Shovels leaned against muddy posts, boots were scraped clean on dry patches of grass, and backs, those young and old, curved like bowed branches under the weight of wear. The man and Robert sat near a crate, turned on its side, their hands raw, their sleeves wet. Lunch was not a feast. It was never a feast, just a shallow bowl passed down the line, filled with something called stew, though it no longer resembled the word. Boiled corn husks, fish skin, crushed acorns, if they were lucky. Still, they ate, because they knew not eating meant something worse. One man, Henry, mumbled a prayer under his breath before lifting his spoon. Another laughed at him, but not cruelly, just tired. The prayer had become habit, like checking the sky for clouds, like counting how many men stood at the gate. The boy who had drawn maps in the dirt that morning sat nearby now, legs crossed, biting into a chunk of dried apple. Someone had traded for it 2 weeks ago, a rare thing. It had been saved, and now apparently gifted to the boy. No one asked why. They were all too tired for questions. After the meal, work slowed. The sun's warmth, weak as it was, began to fade. Fingers stiffened. Tools grew heavier. The man found himself resting against a log, breathing through chapped lips, eyes half closed. And for a moment he wasn't at the fort at all. He was back in Wiltshire. There was a garden, the smell of rosemary. It was just a flicker, but enough to... A voice pulled him back. "You dreamin'?" He smiled without looking. Something like that. They didn't talk about why they had come. Not anymore. There had been promises once. Of gold, Vulcan. Of land, of escape. But now, survival was all they could hold in their hands. Later in the afternoon, as the men returned to reinforcing the wooden wall near the eastern edge, someone called from the watchtower. Not an alarm, just a tone of interest. A man appeared at the tree line, not English. Dressed in deerskin, moving slowly, a single hand raised in greeting. They had seen him before, or someone like him. The guards tensed. One reached for his musket, another shook his head, not yet. The man approached no closer than the outer ditch. He said nothing, but from beneath his cloak he took out a bundle, maize tied in husks, and laid it on the ground. Then he stepped back, waited. From the fort, a soldier returned with a length of cloth, blue and surprisingly clean. It was laid beside the maize. The trade was made. The native man nodded once, then disappeared into the trees. No one cheered, no one clapped. But for the first time that day, shoulders relaxed, just a little. It wasn't peace, but it was something like trust. As the sun dipped low, the chapel bell rang. A piece of iron hung from a beam, struck with a mallet. The sound echoed off wood and water, soft and sad. The chapel itself was no more than a frame, 4 walls, a roof, dirt floor. But they came, men with soot on their faces, women with scarves over their hair, children with bare feet, pale from cold. The preacher stood at the front, tall, thin, with eyes that never blinked enough. His voice was rough, but his words gentle. He spoke not of fire and judgment, but of endurance, of staying, of holding fast through the storm. One man wept quietly, another stared into the distance, lips barely moving. The man sat beside Robert. They didn't speak, but the silence between them was thick with meaning. Some prayed for salvation, others just wanted another day. When darkness settled, the fort changed. Doors were latched, lanterns lit, and 2 men climbed the watchtower with torches and rifles. Wind blew through the cracks. The smell of smoke, always present, deepened. Inside the common house, the man lay down again on the wooden floor. The same spot, the same straw. But one more day survived. Someone coughed. Someone else murmured in sleep. He stared at the ceiling, counted the beams, listened to the breathing of others. And somewhere, distant, fragile, an owl called. The stars outside blinked silently. The trees didn't move, and the fort, for the moment, held. The morning after began like the last, not with a trumpet, not with sunrise, but with stiffness. A slow ache behind the knees, cold breath in the lungs, and the sound of boots being pulled on in the dark. The man sat up slowly. His joints resisted. The straw beneath him had shifted in the night, and now the floor pressed against bone. Robert was already awake, boiling water in a dented pot. The boy slept a little longer, curled beneath a patchwork of blankets and coats. There was no real breakfast, not anymore. Just the memory of it, the idea of something warm, something with salt or fat. But memory didn't feed the body. Today's ration was broth, thin and pale, strained through ash and roots. A single potato, split 4 ways. He ate it slowly, not for the taste, but for the time it gave his hands to rest in warmth. Work without end. The labor began when the sun was still behind the treetops. Every man had a task. Every task was tied to survival. The man's duty was the watchtower today. Repairs, again. Wood didn't last long in the damp. Nails rusted, beams swelled. The rain worked like time, soft and slow, but relentless. He climbed the ladder slowly. Each step creaked. Below, the fort was quiet. Beyond it, only trees. At the top, the wind was colder. He could see the river, silver and still. And far beyond it, smoke. Native fires. Maybe. Or their own old embers finally drifting. He didn't feel fear exactly, only smallness. The world was big here, and they were not. Hunger wasn't just in the belly anymore, it was in the hands, the bones, the thusals. The thoughts. It made people quiet. It made the smallest kindness feel enormous. When one woman, Mary, passed a small crust of bread to the boy without a word, no one commented. But everyone saw, and everyone remembered. Food had become sacred. Even rotten food, even fish with too many bones, or corn stored too long. Sometimes at night they dreamed of butter. Not gold, not power, just butter, melting on hot bread. In a life full of cold and mud and hunger, it was these little dreams that warmed them. That evening, while reinforcing the perimeter, they heard a rustle near the ditch. Not loud, but clear. The men froze. Then a small face peeked from the brush, ears alert, nose twitching. A dog, thin, ribs like rails, matted fur, eyes wide and watchful. It didn't bark, didn't approach, just stared. The boy crouched low and held out a hand. The dog didn't move. Robert tossed a scrap of fish toward it. The dog flinched, then snatched it, and darted back into the trees. Nothing more. But that night, the boy whispered, "He'll come back?" No one disagreed. Late in the week, the sky changed. Heavy clouds moved in from the coast, dark, slow, certain. They covered the fort's supplies with hides and wood, tied down the loose posts, checked the roof. But nothing really stopped the rain. It came in the night, like a curtain falling. The man awoke to water dripping through the roof, landing slowly into a wooden bowl by his side. Drop, drop, drop. He didn't move, just listened. It was better than silence. 2 days later, the wind cleared. The sky cracked open, and in the early light they saw something strange. Green. At the edge of the field, the first sprout, corn. It had survived the frost, against all odds. The man knelt beside it, fingers brushing the tender stalk. It bent, but did not break. Robert laughed, not loudly, just enough. "Would you look at that?" he whispered. The boy grinned. They stood there for a moment, 3 figures in the dawn, staring at a single leaf, as if it were gold, as if it were fire, as if it meant something. And it did. That evening, as the sun drew thin shadows across the ground, someone spotted canoes, 3 of them, moving slowly upstream, painted hulls, silent paddles, still water. The watchtower bell rang twice, not an alarm, but a call for eyes. The men gathered at the palisade wall, peering through the gaps. No weapons were raised, not yet. The canoes drifted to the far bank, opposite the fort, and stopped. 5 figures stepped out, dressed in deerskin, hair braided. They said nothing. They built no fire, just stood, watching, not threatening, not fleeing, just there. The preacher whispered, "They're measuring us." And maybe he was right. At nightfall, the strangers disappeared back into the forest. No trade, no talk, only silence. But that silence said everything. "We are not alone," someone murmured. After the strangers left, the mood inside the fort changed. Not fear, something quieter. Uncertainty. And with that uncertainty came humility. They began to look harder at the land. They learned that cattail roots could be boiled into something soft, that crushed acorns, if soaked, could be eaten, that there were berries they thought were deadly, but weren't. One woman, Anne, had a talent for this. She watched birds, noticed what they ate, then tested the same things in small bites, whispering a prayer before every swallow. She taught the boy how to find mushrooms, the kind that didn't kill, and how to dry leaves for tea. He listened like it was scripture. Anne didn't speak much, but when she did, people listened. Not all wisdom came from books. Some came from watching and surviving. It began with a cough, just one, sharp, shallow, then a second, then a fever. The man heard it first while unloading firewood near the storehouse. A groan from inside, then silence. He pushed the door open slowly. Inside, a young man lay on the floor, face red and damp. His name was Ellis. Beside him, a bucket, half filled with water and blood. The preacher came. So did Mary. They moved Ellis to a separate hut, away from the others, wrapped him in linen, burned dried rosemary at the door, hung garlic from the rafters. Some believed it worked, some didn't. But it gave them something to do. Ellis did not die, but he didn't return to full health either. He sat in the sun now, quiet, staring at nothing. The fort learned to breathe carefully. Every cough became a question. On a morning washed in silver fog, the boy saw him again. The dog, this time, closer, near the cook fire, watching with eyes half closed. His ribs were still sharp, but his steps were calmer. Less fear, more curiosity. The boy offered a scrap of fat. The dog sniffed, paused, then took it gently. From then on, he stayed, never too close, but never gone. They called him Ash for the color of his coat, and for how easily he slipped through shadow. At night, the dog would sit by the gate. At dawn, he was already awake. The boy whispered to him often, told him secrets no one else heard. Sometimes, a creature that says nothing can listen best. One evening, while mending a torn boot near the fire, the man took out a small book. Blank pages, edges warped. He had taken it from his brother before leaving England. The last gift. He opened it now, turned to a clean page, and he wrote, "To William, I hope you are warm. I hope your wife is safe. I hope your land is green." He paused, looked at the fire. "Things here are harder than I believed, but I am still breathing, and that will have to do." He signed it, closed the book. There was no ink, just charcoal, and no ship to carry the words back across the sea. Still, it helped. Some letters aren't meant to arrive, just to be written. The boy couldn't sleep that night. Too many dreams, too much noise in his chest. He rose quietly and went outside. Ash, the dog, followed. They sat near the edge of the fence, staring up at the stars. The boy pointed at them, whispering names. Ones his mother used to say. Hunter. Shield. River snake. The man joined him a moment later, carried a blanket, wrapped it around both their shoulders. No words, just silence and stars. It wasn't a feast, it wasn't a victory, but it was hope, warm, small, and real. Death, when it came, didn't come loudly. There was no scream, no drama, just a stillness that settled into the air and did not leave. It was Thomas this time. An older man, kind. He had helped build the fort's west wall, shared more than he ever took. His hands had been shaking for weeks. He stopped eating. Then, simply, didn't wake. They wrapped him in cloth, the same linen he had patched for years, folded his arms, tied his wrists gently so they wouldn't drift apart. The grave was dug behind the storehouse, where the ground was soft. The preacher said a few words. The boy placed a stone. No one cried. They were too tired for tears. And in this place, grief had become something quieter. Just a deep breath. And a new silence. A storm rolled in 2 nights later. Short, but hard. Winds sharp, rain fast, lightning like a white scar across the sky. When morning came, the east wall was down, cracked posts, half the barrier gone. No one complained. They simply began to rebuild. The man worked next to Robert, passing timber, hammering joints. They didn't speak much, only grunted, nodded, braced beams together. But the rhythm of labor, the unity of shared purpose, was something close to peace. Even Ash, the dog, helped in his own way. He barked at crows, chased them from the food stores, kept the mood light. By sundown, the wall stood again. Not perfect, but strong. Stronger than before. Sometimes rebuilding is more than fixing. Sometimes it's how people stay human. One morning, something changed in the air. It wasn't warmer yet, not really, but the cold had softened. The birds sang longer. The ground felt less tired. Anne noticed it first, the way the trees moved, the smell of wet soil, the color returning to the sky. Then they found buds, tiny green tips pressing through earth, new growth on old branches. The corn patch showed life, and the boy discovered eggs in a nearby nest. Everything had survived, just barely. That night, around the fire, they passed around the last of the dried herbs, boiled them into a bitter tea. Mary smiled for the first time in weeks. The preacher even laughed, a short, surprised sound. And the man? He leaned back, looked at the stars, then turned to the boy and said, "Maybe we'll make it after all." Early Colonial life, Jamestown, 1610. This part of the story brings a shift in rhythm, not because life became easy, but because life, even when hard, still finds a way to bloom, even in a place where hunger lives beside every doorstep. There were days when music played, when hands let go of tools, when people remembered laughter. Not many days, but enough to keep the soul from breaking. It was Mary who first said it aloud, "No work, just for today." At first, no one responded, not because they disagreed, but because they couldn't imagine it, a whole day, with no digging, no hammering, no guarding the gate. But then the preacher smiled, wide, like the sky. "A holy day," he said. "Rest is not laziness, it's gratitude." So the fort agreed. A small pause, a breath. They swept the dirt paths, hung dried flowers on the gate, lit candles early, though the sun was still up. No one wore finery. There was none, but they wore their cleanest shirts, brushed their hair, laughed, lightly, almost surprised. The boy found a ribbon in his mother's satchel, tied it around the dog's neck. Ash wore it proudly. And for one quiet day, the fort breathed like a person, not just a fortress. They heard the wheels first, a long, low creak, wood on dirt, then voices, not in French maybe, or something older. The gatekeeper peered through the palisade cracks and called out, "Visitors!" Not soldiers, not native scouts, but a trading wagon. 3 men, 1 M. They wore wide-brimmed hats. Their clothes and their eyes scanned everything. Inside their wagon, salted meat, iron tools, spools of thread in colors the fort had forgotten existed, red, blue, gold, and best of all, a caged pig. Fat, loud, alive, they bartered fast, old boots for nails, 2 knives for soap, a worn book for a bag of beans. No one spoke much after, but that night, someone sang. The song had no words, just a hum, carried softly on the wind. The pig slept by the cookhouse, unaware it had become the most popular resident in Jamestown. That same night, as the fire crackled low, the preacher asked, "Does anyone know a tale worth telling?" Silence. Then Robert spoke, a former carpenter, now half farmer, half guard. He cleared his throat. "There was a fox," he said, "who pretended to be a priest." The boy's eyes lit up. Robert told it slowly, in the old style, pauses in the right places, voices raised and dropped. The fox wore robes made of stolen silk. He blessed chickens and stole them after dark. He married mice and ate the wedding guests. Laughter came like water. The boy fell back, giggling. Even Mary laughed, loud, full, the way she once did months ago. It wasn't a story of truth, but it was one of joy, and that made it sacred. The following week, a miracle. Anne found a nest of bees, not wild, but gentle, nestled in a hollowed log near the riverbank. She brought back a small comb, golden and glistening. They boiled it with dried apples, served it warm in a battered tin bowl. Sweetness hit their tongues like a dream. Then the preacher brought out an old flute, carved from elderwood, and a drum made from a dry barrel top. Music. Real music. They danced, clumsy, tired, happy, boots stomping, hands clapping. Even Ellis, pale and thin, stood to sway once before sitting again. The dog barked at the drum, the boy spun in circles, and for a moment it felt like the world forgot its weight. Just light, and rhythm, and breath. Late one afternoon, just as the sun dipped low, two figures appeared beyond the trees, a woman and a child. Dressed in leather, faces calm, they did not approach the gate. They waited. The preacher walked out first. No weapons, just a hand raised in greeting. No words were exchanged. Just a pouch passed from the woman's hand to his. Inside, dried herbs, something fragrant, healing. In return, he offered a silver spoon. She smiled, faintly, and nodded. The child pointed to the boy inside the gate, then to Ash. The preacher nodded, and then, without sound, they turned and vanished into the woods. The fort was quiet after that, not afraid, just humbled. They were not alone. They never had been. It was quiet, simple, unexpected. Mary and Ellis had decided, not for love in the storybook sense, but for companionship, for survival. She had lost her husband the winter before. Ellis had lost a sister on the crossing. They both knew grief, and they both needed something solid, even if only a promise. The fort gathered near the well. The preacher stood between two stumps, a cross carved into one. There were no rings, only twine, wrapped around their hands, tied gently, then burned in the fire. 2 souls, the preacher said, still breathing, still here. They shared a kiss, soft, careful. The boy clapped, the dog barked, and someone, no one remembers who, said, "That's the bravest thing I've seen in months." That night, after the small wedding feast, salted meat, dried berries, half a bottle of ale, they sat by the fire longer than usual. The stars were sharp, endless. Anne pointed to one cluster. "Said to be the souls of sailors," she whispered. The boy asked if heaven had walls. The preacher didn't answer quickly. He looked up, thoughtful. "I don't think so," he said at last. "I think heaven is like this night, quiet and full of things we don't yet understand." Robert leaned back against a log, spoke without opening his eyes. "My father used to say, when you've had enough sky for one night, that's when sleep takes you kindly." No one replied, but several of them, that night, fell asleep outside, beside the fire, and none of them had nightmares. Spring had come, real spring, birdsong, soft dirt underfoot, sunlight that didn't feel like a trick. They rose early, shared bread, dipped in honey water, then gathered at the edge of the field. They planted together, men, women, the boy, seeds in cupped hands, fingers in soil. For once no one rushed. They worked slow, deliberate, silent mostly, as though placing each seed was a kind of prayer. The preacher said, "May we see them grow. May we live to eat their fruit." No one answered, but someone, maybe Anne, began to hum, and one by one others joined, not loudly, just enough. A planting song, soft, older than any one of them, maybe older than the ground itself. It was Robert. He packed the night before. A satchel, a knife, a small pot of ash from the fire pit. He said it brought luck. He didn't say why he was leaving, only that the mountains called. He had seen them on a clear day, sharp shapes, far beyond the trees. The boy cried. Mary hugged him like a brother. Ellis gave him a new pair of boots. The preacher handed him a page from his book, a psalm written by hand. At dawn, he stood outside the gate. The dog followed him halfway down the path, then stopped, watched until he was gone. No one spoke of it again, but sometimes late at night, Anne would look to the hills and say, "I hope he found what he needed." And someone always replied, "I hope he found someone kind." The final celebration of that season came without planning. It started with a broken lantern. Anne was cleaning, dropped it. The glass cracked, but the flame inside kept burning. So she hung it in a tree outside her hut. Then Mary hung hers, then Ellis. By dusk, nearly everyone had done the same. Tiny lights, swaying, glowing, whispering. The boy called it the tree with stars. They didn't know why they did it. Maybe to remember, maybe to forget. That night they didn't talk much, just watched. The wind was gentle, the flames steady, and for one beautiful hour they didn't feel like survivors. They felt like people. We now close this chapter on something rare. Joy, not constant, not perfect, but real. Even in the hardest places, people have always found moments to celebrate. A ribbon on a dog, a seed in the earth, a flame in a tree. Next up, we begin. This is not an easy part of the story. It's a part many left out, because it's quiet, because it hurts, but it's also honest and necessary, because survival isn't just about food or shelter, it's about what's left when things begin to fall apart. Let's begin. It began with Ellis, a dry cough, small at first. He thought it was the smoke. Too much time near the cookhouse. Too many cold nights. But it didn't go away. By the third day, he was sitting out morning work. By the fifth, he was shivering, and the others were speaking in quiet voices. The preacher boiled herbs. Anne laid cool cloths on his forehead. Mary refused to leave his S. The boy asked if he would be okay. No one answered. Not directly. The cough continued. The preacher began keeping a tally on a piece of wood. Not names, just marks, one for each sick, a line through it for each death. It looked like a fence, a crooked one, full of broken rails. There were 7 marks by the end of the week, then 10, then 12. The boy counted them when no one was looking, then stopped. Too many, too fast. The rain came next, not gentle, not washing, just cold, hard, endless. It soaked the earth, turned paths into mud, soaked bedding, spoiled supplies. They tried to dig trenches, but the ground collapsed. Every step felt like walking through pudding. The preacher said, "This is the kind of rain that forgets to end." Someone joked it was punishment. No one laughed. One night, the cookhouse caught fire, not from lightning, just from carelessness. Ellis, too weak to stand, had dropped a coal. No one blamed him, but no one said it aloud either. They rushed water, blankets, prayer. But the flames were too fast. The roof collapsed. The boy cried. Ash barked until his voice went hoarse. By morning, all that remained were stones and blackened wood. Their warmest place, gone. Ellis spoke in fever dreams. He thought Mary was his sister, said her name again and again, whispered something about a boat that never arrived. He saw birds that weren't there, spoke Latin he never learned. Once he laughed for 10 minutes straight. No reason. Then went silent. Mary sat beside him every hour. She held his hand. She braided his hair. And when he finally passed, she didn't make a sound, just closed his eyes, and stayed beside him until the candle burned out. Anne kept busy. She boiled cloth, scrubbed everything, hung laundry in the smoke to dry. She said it was for health, said the smoke killed sickness, but really, she needed something to do, to keep her hands moving, to keep her thoughts from drifting into dark corners. She didn't sleep much, and when she did, she dreamed of her father's garden, the one with lavender, the one with the bees. The preacher found a scrap of paper, old, ink-stained. He wrote on it every night, a letter to no one. He didn't say what was in it, only folded it neatly, wrapped it in cloth, kept it under his coat. The boy asked once. He smiled and said, "It's something I'll send, when the wind remembers where it's going." They began closing huts, sealing them with branches, marking the doors with soot. Inside, blankets still folded, plates left out. One had a spoon resting on it, as if waiting. The fort shrank, not in size, but in sound, fewer voices, fewer footsteps. The dog stopped barking at night. Even Ash grew quiet, and still the sky changed. The clouds thinned, the moon grew brighter, birds returned, and one morning the preacher stood on the wall, looked out, and whispered, "We're still here." Spring arrived without music, no trumpet of birdsong, no sudden bloom, just a slow, steady drip of meltwater from the eaves. The ground softened, just enough. So they buried Ellis, not behind the fort, but in the grove with the wild onions. Mary chose the place. The preacher carried the spade. They dug together, slowly. No rush, no fear of interruption. The boy picked a stone from the riverbed and placed it at the head. He didn't carve anything into it, just pressed his palm to it. Then let go. For weeks they had seen nothing. No tracks, no rustle, no life. Then one morning, before the sun was up, Anne stepped outside and saw it. A single deer, brown, thin, still. It stared at her. She stared back. And then, as if deciding she wasn't worth running from, it turned and walked back into the woods. She didn't tell anyone. But that night, she left an apple core near the fence, and the next morning, it was gone. Mary didn't tell them she was expecting. Maybe she hadn't known. Maybe the grief made it quieter. Maybe it was Ellis's child. One cold evening she began to cry out. Anne stayed with her, boiled water, wrapped her hands in linen. The boy sat outside the hut, hugging the dog. It took hours, screaming, sweating, then silence, then a cry, small, wet, alive, a girl. Mary didn't name her that night. She just held her, looked at the ceiling, and whispered, "Stay." There was a change in the way they worked. Before, it had been about getting through. Now, it was about staying. The preacher organized the gathering of wood. Anne mapped out the dry spots. The boy learned which trees gave easiest. Ash found old trails, sniffed out cut logs buried under snow. They laughed once when the cart broke a wheel. Actually laughed. It felt strange, like using a muscle that hadn't moved all winter. It happened without warning. An older man, hair like bark, eyes like moss, walked into the clearing. He didn't speak English, but he raised his hands, palm out, slow. The preacher stepped forward, nodded. The man placed something on the ground, a bundle. Inside it, cornmeal, a flint knife, and a string of dried berries. He waited. They brought him cooked meat. He took one bite, smiled, then he left. Didn't return. But from that day forward they found more gifts. On stumps, on stones, on the path. Someone was watching, but not unkindly. They began to fix the cookhouse, then the storage hut, then the fence, not because they had enough people, but because doing was better than waiting. The preacher sketched plans on tree bark. Anne organized shifts. Mary, baby swaddled to her chest, helped bind logs. Even the boy worked. They took breaks more often, shared food without counting, and every day they found a little more of their strength. Ash had been slowing down, his joints stiff, his bark quieter. He no longer chased birds. One morning the boy found him lying near the fire pit, alive, but not rising. They sat together. The boy read aloud from the preacher's book, stumbling over the words, but steady. Ash licked his hand once, then stopped breathing. They buried him behind the hut. The boy carved a paw print into the soft earth. Later, someone, no one knows who, laid a bundle of wildflowers there. It was Anne who saw it, from the wall. Just after sunrise, a sail, white, torn, swaying. She didn't shout, just pointed. They gathered slowly. Mary held the baby. The preacher knelt. The boy whispered, "Is it real?" The ship drifted closer, not fast, not sure, but it was coming. They watched for hours. It reached the mouth of the river by evening. The preacher said, "Something is arriving, or someone." The new arrivals brought supplies, barrels of flour, salt, shoes, and questions. Would they stay? Would they go back? Was this place worth it? The preacher passed out small slips of paper, told each person to write one word on it, no names, no speeches. The boy wrote, "Stay." Anne wrote, "Maybe." Mary didn't write anything. She just tucked the paper into the folds of the baby's blanket. One evening, without discussing it, no one lit the fire. They sat in darkness, the stars above, the baby asleep. the preacher silent. Even the boy didn't speak. They just listened, to each other breathing, to the forest around them. It wasn't fear, it wasn't mourning, it was rest, the first real one in months. The next morning the earth smelled different. Like rain, yes, but also something growing. The girl, now with eyes open, reached for the sky. Just a little, just once. The preacher said, "She will remember none of this." Anne said, "But maybe she will grow something better." The fort was still small, still scarred, but there were hands, there was earth, there was time, and that was enough. They gathered what seeds they had, not many. Some barley, a handful of peas, squash, beans. The newcomers brought more, sealed in cloth bags. Hard to believe such small things could be so important. The preacher held one in his palm. "Each one," he said, "is a decision." The boy planted the first one. He didn't say a word, just pressed it into the earth, and waited. The new settlers helped repair the fort gate. It hadn't closed properly in months. It sagged, stuck, groaned like an old man when pushed. Together, they reset the hinges, sharpened the edges, tested it 10 times over. When it finally swung shut, smooth and strong, someone clapped. Someone else cheered. The boy smiled. "Now we can let people in," he said, "instead of keeping things out." Mary began weaving again, with old thread, with new scraps, with time. She made a shawl for Anne, booties for the baby, a bag for the boy with careful stitches shaped like leaves. It wasn't about the things, it was the act of making them. Each loop, a word, each knot, a memory, each pattern, a prayer. One day, the preacher handed the boy a small book. "Write," he said. The boy blinked. "I don't know how much." "You'll learn." The journal had soft leather, empty pages. The boy wrote his name, then the name of the dog, then the names of those they buried. Then, "Today I planted something that might grow." He didn't know it yet, but he'd keep writing for years. Anne organized a supper. Not a feast in the old sense, no roast boar, no wine, but they shared everything. Flatbread, dried berries, pickled roots, a spoonful of honey. One of the new settlers had a fiddle, played something crooked and warm. Someone danced, badly. Then someone else joined. The baby clapped, and for the first time they celebrated something. Not survival, but life. The newcomers didn't all move in. Some pitched tents just beyond the fence, not from distrust, but from habit. At first there was distance, but then they began trading. Recipes, seeds, stories. One man told of seeing the northern lights. Another swore he'd survived a bear attack by playing dead. The preacher smiled. "Sometimes," he said, "new roots grow beside old ones." That night the fire burned high again. They gathered around it, 27 of them now. Mary sang a lullaby, the boy added wood. The preacher read from a page, not scripture, but a poem. It wasn't about God, or loss, or hope. It was about wind, about water, about watching the world and being in it, fully. No one spoke afterward. The fire said enough. They opened the old storehouse at last. Inside were things untouched for months. A carved spoon, a woman's shawl, a child's shoe. Each one remembered. Each one held. They didn't take them for use. They placed them together, wrapped them, wrote names or guessed them, then buried the bundle near the wild onions. Loss, honored, not erased. He wrote it by candlelight. Spring has returned. The child lives. We remain. He left the book with the boy, said nothing, just rested his hand on the boy's shoulder, then went to bed and slept longer than usual. And so, one morning the boy awoke early, not from cold, not from fear, just because he wanted to. He stepped outside. The grass was damp, the sky open. He saw birds overhead. The dog's paw print was still there in the dirt, softened, but visible. He didn't say anything. He just smiled, and began the day. Weeks later they followed the river, found the sea, found the salt, found the wind, built a cairn of stones. The boy told the baby about Ellis, and ash, and the fire. The girl cooed. A wave crashed. The boy whispered, "This is where it begins again." Mary let the baby touch the stone over Ellis's grave, then stood up, turned away. She didn't cry, didn't pray, just walked back. Because memory is not a place you live in, it's a place you visit and then leave, carrying what matters. The visitors returned. This time they came by water. Smooth paddles, dark wood, silent arrivals. They brought food, furs, words. Some shared, some only guessed. The preacher bowed. The boy offered a gift. The canoe left before sundown. But the connection stayed. Some decided to leave, head inland, west, toward rumors of open land. The boy stayed. So did Mary. Anne, too. They hugged, traded what they could, tied pouches of seeds to belts. No anger, no fear, just change. She took them at sunrise, 2 wobbly feet, a lurch, a laugh. Everyone saw. Anne cried. The boy clapped. The preacher just whispered, "Now we move forward." They didn't rebuild the way things had been. They built differently, wider, stronger, softer. They planted flowers by the graves. They told stories at the fire. They remembered, not as weight, but as thread, a thread that ties all things, the wind, the earth, the stars, each other. And as the girl grew, they told her, "You were born after the long winter. You are the spring." The colony breathes differently now. Gone is the chaos of the first landings, the sheer panic of starvation, the desperation of cold nights without shelter. In its place, structure, rhythm, and something else, softer, warmer. The presence of women and children brings not just population, but purpose. With each child born into the dust and timbers of Jamestown, the colony edges closer to permanence. Morning begins quietly, no longer frantic, but steady. Fires are lit in hearths not just for warmth, but to bake. The scent of cornbread and dried herbs begins to replace that of desperation. There are still aches, backs sore from labor, hearts missing England. But now there is a place to rest that isn't a hole in the ground or a ship's damp hull. Wooden homes replace lean-tos. Thatched roofs are replaced with pitched shingles. Some windows even have glass, small panes shipped from across the sea. Inside, families gather at rough-hewn tables. Children recite scripture and phonics by firelight, their small voices rising over the occasional crackle of dried oak. The schoolhouse stands as a symbol. Built modestly from pine, it smells of sawdust and ink. There are slates, bits of chalk, and a cross nailed to the front. One teacher, often a clergyman's wife, guides the children through prayers, writing, and stories of England they will never truly know. Their roots are here now, tangled in the red Virginia soil. Trade with local indigenous peoples, though tense, becomes structured. Corn, beans, and tobacco flow in exchange for iron pots, cloth, and sometimes, dangerously, muskets. It's a fragile peace, one negotiated daily by brave intermediaries who must speak carefully, walk gently. A doctor arrives by ship, a young man from Bristol with trembling hands but a kind face. He brings knowledge, poultices for burns, herbs to soothe coughs, and the terrifying instrument of bloodletting. Illness still takes many, but fewer than before. Artisans follow. A blacksmith sets up near the river, his forge clanging and sparking from dawn until dusk. Nearby, a cooper bends barrels, a weaver threads linen, and the sharp scent of tanned hides drifts from the tannery. Clergy lead services under the open sky, then inside wooden chapels. These sermons are quieter now, less fiery, less about sin and more about perseverance, about love, about finding meaning in loss, about why God may have brought them here in the first place. Councils form, men debate by candlelight, some call for more laws, others beg for mercy and flexibility. A few dream of owning vast tracts of land, an empire in miniature. Most just want peace, safety, a plot to call their own. Evenings become sacred. After the work is done, after the children sleep, the settlers sit together, sometimes in silence, sometimes sharing news from letters brought by ship, sometimes singing low hymns or telling ghost stories with eyes fixed on the dancing fire. Journals begin to fill not with fear, but with plans. Sketches of barns, lists of seeds to order, names for future children, maps of where the next fence might go, hopes written in ink instead of whispered in prayer. A woman who once feared she'd never see spring now plants a garden, rows of sage, rosemary, and wild strawberries. A man who buried 3 brothers now teaches his son to fish. A girl who arrived mute with grief now leads hymns at dusk. And the colony listens to the river, to the wind, to each other. This is not England. It never will be, but it no longer needs to be. This place, once alien, once terrifying, is becoming home. The settlers look to the horizon now, not in fear, but with cautious hope. They know hardship still waits. They know another winter will come. But they also know they have each other. They have land, and they have time. And sometimes, when all is quiet, when the stars shine just right through the cracked glass, they believe, maybe they were always meant to be here. And so ends the first chapter, not of a perfect colony, nor a flawless society, but of a beginning, hard-won, bitter-earned, but real, the first fragile roots of what would become a nation. They are no longer strangers to the land. They were born here, beneath wooden rafters and within the sound of crickets, not church bells. The first generation of children born in Jamestown open their eyes to a world shaped not by memory of England, but by rhythm of Virginia's tides. They learn to walk not on cobbled lanes, but through muddy corn rows. They speak English, yes, but they also understand the quiet gestures of their Powhatan neighbors. To these children, England is a story, told by candlelight, woven into lullabies, tied to faded letters hidden in boxes. Their roots stretch down into foreign soil and grow anyway. Fathers teach sons to split logs and hammer iron. Mothers show daughters how to boil roots, mend cloth, and soothe fevers with whispered prayers. Faith remains, but it is quieter, shaped more by wind than cathedral. By adolescence they are stronger, quieter, and far less nostalgic than their parents. They do not remember famine, but they understand hunger. They do not recall ocean crossings, but they know rivers, know how to read the sky before a storm. Courtship is simple. Stolen glances, letters etched on bark. A Sunday nod becomes a lifelong vow. The crosses under which they marry are unpolished, yet sacred. Some feel torn between the reverence for their parents' past and a restless yearning for their own future. A few dream of returning to England. Most do not. As this generation ages into adulthood, a quiet confidence emerges. They build faster, plant deeper, and look outward. Their eyes search the horizon, not for ships from home, but for space to expand. And slowly, without ceremony, a new identity begins to shape. Not English, not native. Something else. Something American. The colony grows like a vine. New homesteads branch outward from Jamestown, pushing into forest, hugging the riverbanks. Paths become roads. Roads become trade routes. Boats shuttle to sell tobacco eastward, rumors westward. Trade becomes the lifeblood. Corn for glass, fur for tools, beads for iron. A world of bartering gives way to ledgers, contracts, debt. Wealth arrives quietly, first in harvest, then in habits. Imported fabrics, clocks, mirrors, but wealth carries weight. Tobacco binds them to Europe, even as their roots sink deeper into America. And with tobacco comes labor. First, indentured servants, their terms numbered in years. Then, enslaved people, bound not by contract, but by skin. It begins slowly. One arrival, then another. A quiet shadow spreads. Few speak of it, fewer question it. Meanwhile, treaties with native nations are signed, and broken, and signed again. Land is exchanged, sometimes peacefully, sometimes under threat. Some native families trade, others leave, a few fight back. There are fires, there are nights of silence. There are stories told in both languages, about betrayal, about ghosts, about things that once were. And, through it all, Jamestown grows. Not into a village, but into a world. Far away, London shifts. New kings, new taxes, new rules. Virginia is still a colony, but it now feels the weight of empire. Governors arrive with fresh orders, quotas, censuses, decrees. Some settlers shrug, others bristle. Quiet resistance forms, not in rebellion, but in refusal. A tax unpaid, a message delayed, a sermon slightly altered. Religion, once a unifying balm, begins to splinter. Some embrace Baptist fire, others find solace in silence, in Quaker peace. The town suffers a great fire, flames devour timbers, but within months, brick buildings rise. Sharper lines, firmer foundations, education spreads, children read the Bible, women teach daughters letters in secret. And with words come questions. What does it mean to be ruled from across the sea? What does freedom taste like? Does loyalty require silence? They are not rebels, not yet. But something stirs. In the quiet corners of taverns, in the margins of church notes, in glances exchanged during prayer, something is coming. The year is 1675. Many who walked off the original ships are long buried. Their grandchildren now sit at the head of the table. Farms pass from father to son. Traditions shift, slowly, like river stones worn by time. They no longer wait for ships from England. They write their own laws, print their own news, pray in their own ways. Some still swear allegiance to the crown, but in the quiet, they wonder what it means. Are they English or something else? New words emerge. American, Virginian, colonist. Not titles yet, but seeds. Debates fill meeting halls. Should we tax ourselves? What rights do we possess? How do we govern men across an ocean? There is no answer, only discussion, and silence, and hope. Graveyards mark every hill, but so do orchards. Taverns echo with laughter. Churches hum with hymns. The colony is no longer a project. It is a place. It is home. A cabin stands near the James River. Inside, an old woman lights a candle. She is nearly blind now, her fingers stiff. But she writes. To her great-granddaughter, in slow, curling ink. She writes of ships, wooden and cracked, of hunger that made her teeth ache, of a man she married in spring, of a child buried in frost. She speaks of the first church, the first plow, the first time she saw snow melt into soil. She writes not with bitterness, but with gratitude. The candle flickers. The river flows. She speaks of the land as though it breathes, because to her, it does. Her final words are simple. Live kindly. Build something worth remembering. Outside, the river continues on. It has seen it all. And so, the story of Jamestown ends, not with fanfare, but with memory. And with a light passed forward, let us carry it now.